I returned home from a short business trip expecting peace, but instead found my neighbor, the notorious HOA Karen, relaxing by a pool she'd secretly built on my land. Now she's demanding I sell because she's already using it. Little did I know this bizarre confrontation was only the start of a war filled with sabotage, dark secrets, and a battle for justice that would shake our entire community. The first time I laid eyes on Cloverfield Hills, I immediately pictured white picket fences, perfectly trimmed hedges, and neighbors who waved cheerfully while watering their rose gardens. In retrospect, I probably should have checked if the neighbors came included with pitchforks. My name is Alex Hamilton, not the founding father, just a remote working software engineer, and I was admittedly naive enough to think moving from the chaotic city to an upscale suburban paradise would finally bring some peace to my life. The brochure promised tranquility and community spirit. What it conveniently failed to mention was Diana Campbell, or as everyone else lovingly whispered behind her back, HOA Karen. My first clue that something was off happened the day I moved in. I was fumbling with boxes when a bright pink golf cart, decked out with more blinking lights than a Vegas casino, rolled up onto my driveway. At the wheel sat Diana, proudly sporting a sun visor emblazoned with the words, HOA President. She had the kind of smile that suggested she'd just won an argument you didn't know you were having. "You must be Alex," Diana chirped, hopping out without an invitation. Her eyes quickly assessed my belongings as though calculating the resale value. "Guilty as charged," I chuckled. "Nice cart. Part of the presidential perks?" She ignored my quip. "I'm Diana Campbell. Just so you're aware, we have rules here. Strict guidelines. It's why Cloverfield Hills is practically utopia. You won't find a blade of grass taller than 2.4 inches guaranteed." I nodded slowly, wondering if she measured it herself with tiny rulers. "Sounds idyllic." Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Just remember, Alex, a happy neighborhood means following the rules. Oh, and don't forget our monthly meetings. Attendance is mandatory for newcomers." She sped off in a whirl of glittering lights and implied threats. Welcome home indeed. The first month went smoothly, mostly because Diana seemed preoccupied chasing down the Benson twins for unauthorized lemonade stands and lecturing old Mr. Perkins about his non-compliant mailbox color, forest green, the horror. For me, however, something odd began to surface. My electricity bills were skyrocketing. Working from home meant I was pretty meticulous about my usage, but my statements suggested I was secretly hosting rock concerts or smelting iron in the basement. My modest bungalow couldn't possibly devour this much energy. One sunny afternoon, baffled and a bit suspicious, I invited Pete, the neighborhood handyman, whose enthusiastic curiosity far outweighed his actual expertise, to help investigate. Pete arrived wearing coveralls so pristine it looked like he'd ironed them. "Think someone's stealing your electricity?" Pete asked, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "I mean, I've seen it happen on TV. Does anyone actually do that?" I asked skeptically. "Hey, anything's possible around here. One time, Diana fined me for unapproved foliage, and I swear all I did was accidentally plant tomatoes instead of petunias." Pete diligently examined my fuse box, which meant mostly tapping on things with a screwdriver. Then his eyebrows furrowed as he followed the outdoor cable lines across my property. Alex, did you always have this giant cable running underground?" he asked, tugging lightly at a thick black wire partially hidden under the landscaping mulch. "I thought that was just standard landscaping stuff," I admitted sheepishly. Pete shook his head. "No way. Let's see where this goes." Following the cable felt like tracking some suburban mystery, and soon we stood at the edge of my spacious backyard. A fresh white privacy fence, which I assumed belonged to my neighbor, stood defiantly about 10 feet beyond what I'd assumed was my property line. "I don't remember this fence being here when I moved in," I murmured. "That's Diana's fence," Pete said casually, leaning on it. "She put it up last month, said she got board approval." "But isn't that on my property?" I questioned, suddenly feeling nauseous. Pete shrugged. "Not according to her." A chilling suspicion formed in my gut, deepening with every step around the fence line. When we peered through a small gap, the sight left us speechless. A sparkling crystal blue swimming pool, landscaped elegantly with tropical flowers and deck chairs. And right there, reclining leisurely in a flamboyant sun hat, sipping what was presumably a HOA-approved cocktail, was Diana. Pete and I exchanged bewildered glances. Pete, she built a freaking pool on my land? Pete nodded slowly, eyes wide with incredulity. Yep, it seems you're unknowingly sponsoring her tropical paradise. Does this explain my electricity bill? Pete squinted at the pool's humming filter and fancy lighting. Oh yeah, she's definitely hosting luau's on your dime. Before I could stop myself, frustration and adrenaline propelled me forward. Diana glanced up lazily as I approached, unfazed and unapologetic. Oh, hello again, neighbor. Lovely day, isn't it? She purred smoothly. Diana, I said evenly, trying to control my temper. Did you happen to realize you're lounging in a pool built on my property, using electricity I'm paying for? She feigned surprise, dramatically lowering her sunglasses. Alex, the fence clearly marks my property line. According to what, exactly? I challenged. According to me, she said brightly, flashing a practiced smile. Besides, I'm already using it. It's hardly neighborly to interrupt someone's relaxation, don't you think? I stood there, slack-jawed by her audacity, as Diana rose confidently from her lounge chair. If it's really such a big deal, you could always sell me the land. Of course, now that I've upgraded it, I assume you'll offer a discount. My fists clenched involuntarily, but before I could react, Pete coughed loudly, offering comedic distraction. Maybe we should talk this out over some HOA-approved lemonade? Diana beamed falsely. Excellent suggestion, Peter. She sauntered off, leaving me to stare at my stolen paradise. Pete patted me reassuringly on the shoulder. Alex, welcome to suburbia. Looks like your dream of peaceful living just took a chlorine-scented turn. That evening, as I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by the serene hum of electrical meters spinning madly outside, I vowed quietly, Diana might have built her little oasis on my land, but she had no idea who she'd picked a fight with. If she wanted a war, she'd get one, complete with garden gnomes, neon flamingos, and a dose of revenge served with a side of HO-approved sarcasm. The morning after Diana's grand pool reveal, I woke to the sound of my doorbell ringing insistently, as if someone were tapping out Morse code with ADHD. Stumbling to the door in my pajamas, I flung it open to find Pete standing there, jittering with caffeine-induced energy, waving a stack of brightly colored flyers. Alex, wake up, buddy. Pete practically shouted, thrusting a neon-pink sheet into my hand. You're famous now. Blinking sleepily, I squinted at the flyer. Emergency HO meeting today. Property line dispute between Diana Campbell and new resident, Alex Hamilton. Refreshments provided, bring your own napkins. Attendance highly encouraged. Highly encouraged? I muttered sarcastically, running a hand over my disheveled hair. Sounds more like mandatory fun. Pete nodded enthusiastically. Oh yeah, Diana printed like 1,000 of these last night. Mr. Perkins caught her stuffing them into mailboxes at 2 a.m. I'm glad she's using her insomnia productively, I sighed, suddenly feeling my morning optimism drain away faster than my stolen electricity. Guess I'd better show up before she tells everyone I'm secretly hosting monster truck rallies on my lawn. The community center, essentially a glorified shed with plastic flowers stapled to the walls, was packed by the time I arrived, coffee in hand and Pete following like an excited puppy. Chairs lined up neatly around a central podium, where Diana stood poised like a suburban dictator, smiling tightly. Around her, neighbors whispered conspiratorially, some waving the flyers like tickets to a boxing match. Ah, Alex, so glad you could join us, Diana called out as if she'd expected me to flee town overnight. Wouldn't miss it, I replied dryly, sliding into a seat between Mr. Perkins and Sharon, the HOA treasurer whose stern face suggested she'd been enforcing rules since birth. Diana cleared her throat dramatically, instantly silencing the chatter. Neighbors, a serious issue has disturbed the harmony of Cloverfield Hills. It appears our new resident Alex Hamilton, she paused to glance dramatically at me, has accused me, your devoted HO president, of building my backyard pool on his property. A scandalized gasp rippled through the crowd. I half expected someone to faint theatrically. Wait, aren't you actually using his electricity too? Pete interjected innocently, prompting another shocked murmur. Diana's smile tightened dangerously. Thank you, Peter, she said crisply. That's an entirely separate matter. I raised an eyebrow. Not according to my last electricity bill. It's high enough to power Disneyland for a week. Several neighbors laughed softly, but Diana shot them a look sharp enough to silence them instantly. Alex, Diana continued, regaining her poise, the pool was approved by HOA majority vote. I never voted, Sharon spoke up skeptically. In fact, we never discussed a pool. Diana blinked, momentarily caught off guard before swiftly changing tactics. Be that as it may, boundaries have clearly been misinterpreted. She gestured theatrically to a large poster board displaying a crudely drawn map, obviously hand-sketched in markers, that showed my property ending neatly where her fence began. Did your niece draw that, Diana? Mr. Perkins quipped loudly, prompting laughter from the crowd. Diana glared. This is official documentation, Diana insisted indignantly. Alex, in the spirit of neighborliness, I generously propose you sell me your disputed land. After all, I've clearly improved it significantly. So generous, I deadpanned. I'm guessing you expect a friendly neighbor discount too? Well, improvements do depreciate your asking price, she replied smugly. It's basic real estate. I shook my head frustrated. Sorry, Diana, but I'm not interested. She looked stunned, as if no one had ever dared refuse her before. Refusal would complicate matters, Alex. I strongly advise you reconsider. The meeting adjourned with Diana's thinly veiled threats hanging ominously. As I left the community center, Pete jogged beside me, practically vibrating with excitement. Man, you really ticked her off, he chuckled. You're like Cloverfield's Robin Hood. If Robin Hood had Wi-Fi outages and astronomical electric bills, I muttered. That afternoon, as I tried to focus on work, my internet suddenly disconnected, plunging my screen into darkness mid-conference call. Annoyed, I rebooted the router. No luck. Checking outside, I spotted a bright pink golf cart parked near the utility box across the street. Diana stood there, clipboard in hand, instructing a confused-looking cable technician. What now? I groaned, storming outside. Oh, Alex, Diana cooed innocently. We noticed your utility hookups weren't HOA approved. They had to be temporarily disconnected. HOA approved internet? I sputtered incredulously. She tapped her clipboard smugly. Section 6A clearly states all utility installations must be reviewed. Your wires looked suspiciously unregulated. Unregulated wires? I repeated in disbelief. Diana, this is ridiculous. It's procedure, dear, she smirked before speeding away triumphantly in her cart, leaving me standing helplessly on the sidewalk. Just as I felt completely defeated, Sharon approached quietly from behind a tree, glancing over her shoulder as if we were spies in enemy territory. Alex, I think it's time you saw something, she whispered conspiratorially, handing me a thick file labeled HOA Confidential. What's this? I asked, heart racing with curiosity. She hesitated, lowering her voice. Financial records. Diana's been secretly diverting funds for her little poolside oasis. None of it was ever approved. My jaw dropped. You're serious? Deadly, she replied, adjusting her glasses solemnly. And there's more. Someone else in this community has been footing Diana's electric bill, through suspicious underground wiring. My heart skipped. You mean? She nodded grimly. Alex, she's been siphoning electricity from your property since the day you moved in. I stood stunned, overwhelmed by betrayal and fury, before finally cracking a determined smile. Well, if Diana wants a fight, she picked the wrong neighbor, I declared confidently. Sharon smiled slyly, adjusting her perfectly starched collar. Welcome to suburbia, Alex. Let's take her down. As I returned home, clutching the damning file, my resolve hardened. Diana Campbell had built her empire on manipulation and intimidation, but she'd just underestimated the neighborhood's newest resident. It was time for some suburban justice, with a side of revenge that was definitely not HOA approved. The next day started with the distinct sound of heavy machinery rumbling outside my bedroom window. Groaning, I peeked out, half expecting Diana to be rolling up with a bulldozer, ready to declare martial law over my backyard. Instead, I saw Pete, my ever-enthusiastic ally, overseeing a small excavator tearing into the landscaping near Diana's fence line. What the heck is going on, Pete? I yelled, rushing outside in slippers and an old college hoodie. Pete waved cheerily, completely oblivious to my panic. Morning, Alex. Just doing some investigating. Thought we'd find out exactly how Diana's been siphoning your electricity. By tearing up the whole yard? I asked incredulously, eyeing the growing crater in my previously pristine lawn. Relax, Pete said with a dismissive gesture. It's just grass. We'll put it back. I rubbed my temples. That's not really how grass works, Pete. Ignoring me, Pete motioned toward the hole. Check this out. I stepped carefully toward the edge, peering down cautiously. There, tangled amongst roots and dirt, was a massive cluster of wires feeding directly from my house straight beneath Diana's fence. Well, I'll be, I muttered, astonished. How did she even pull this off without anyone noticing? Pete shrugged, grinning like he'd found buried treasure. Diana's pretty good at distractions. Plus, she probably fined people for looking too closely. Suddenly, a voice rang out sharply from behind the fence. What exactly do you two think you're doing? I glanced up, heart sinking as Diana stormed toward us in designer gardening boots and sunglasses large enough to hide her indignation. You're destroying community property. Actually, Diana, I replied calmly, holding back my irritation, I think it's pretty clear we've found your little side hustle. Care to explain why your pool runs off my meter? Her lips tightened into a thin, icy line. That wiring was here before I moved in. Maybe you're stealing from me. Pete laughed loudly enough to startle nearby birds. Wow, that's bold even for you. Diana scowled fiercely at Pete before turning back to me. If you want to accuse me of theft, Alex, you better have proof. Otherwise, expect a lawsuit. Funny you should mention proof, I said lightly, enjoying her sudden discomfort. Turns out Sharon's quite the record keeper. Diana visibly paled beneath her makeup. For a moment, genuine panic flickered behind those oversized sunglasses. She quickly regained composure. I won't tolerate harassment. You will sell that land, Alex, willingly or not. With that ominous statement, she spun on her heels and stalked away, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume and bitterness. I think we hit a nerve, Pete whispered dramatically, leaning toward me conspiratorially. Yeah, I sighed, feeling uneasy despite our small victory. And I think it just got personal. That evening, a knock at the door pulled me from my tense thoughts. I opened it warily, half expecting Diana to have returned with lawyers or torches. Instead, I found Mr. Perkins standing awkwardly, holding a plate of cookies wrapped neatly in cellophane. Mr. Perkins? Asked, surprised. You bake. Only under extreme stress, he replied dryly, pushing past me into the living room. Listen, Alex, I know Diana. She won't just back down, she'll escalate. You need to be careful. You came here just to warn me? I asked, genuinely touched. He shrugged, looking embarrassed. Well, Pete's been bragging about your heroic stand against tyranny. Figured you could use moral support. I laughed warmly. That bad, huh? Worse, Perkins admitted. When Diana feels cornered, she fights dirty. But there's a way we can get ahead of her. How? I asked eagerly. He leaned in, eyes twinkling mischievously. Have you ever been to one of Diana's infamous HOA tea parties? An hour later, we found ourselves lurking awkwardly behind decorative hedges in Diana's yard, dressed in borrowed maintenance uniforms Pete had somehow procured. Mr. Perkins squinted skeptically at the tiny embroidered Cloverfield landscaping patch on his chest. Are you sure these disguises will hold up? Perkins asked nervously, adjusting the ill-fitting cap. Pete grinned confidently. Trust me, nobody ever questions the landscaping crew. We quietly maneuvered through Diana's obsessively neat garden until we reached the pool house, the supposed nerve center of her backyard paradise. Mr. Perkins stood watch nervously outside while Pete and I slipped inside, hearts racing with adrenaline. The pool house was surprisingly cluttered, stacks of HOA flyers and half-finished paperwork scattered everywhere. Amidst the chaos stood a small locked filing cabinet labeled, Confidential HOA Business, Keep Out. Pete quickly produced a screwdriver from his pocket and knelt dramatically. Stand back, I saw this on TV once. I held my breath, glancing repeatedly toward the door as Pete fumbled noisily with the lock. After an excruciating minute, the drawer popped open triumphantly. Pete gave a proud thumbs up. Piece of cake. Inside lay a thick folder marked simply, Pool Project Expenses. My pulse quickened as I thumbed through documents listing HOA funds diverted to suspiciously vague projects. Even more shocking was a document at the back, clearly falsified approval forms bearing forged signatures from half the neighborhood. "Pete, look at this, she forged these," I whispered, shocked. "This is actual fraud." Suddenly Mr. Perkins burst into the pool house, shouting frantically, "She's coming back. Abort mission." We scrambled chaotically from the building just in time to spot Diana strolling leisurely toward us, carrying an oversized watering can. "What are you three doing?" she demanded, eyes narrowing dangerously. Pete quickly adopted his best landscaping voice. We were checking your sprinklers for sprinkler compliance." Diana glared suspiciously, tapping her foot impatiently. "Sprinkler compliance?" I nodded vigorously, adrenaline pumping. "Very serious regulations, Diana." She considered for a tense second, then sighed dismissively. "Fine, just hurry up. And stay off my begonias." We nearly collapsed from relief as she turned away, clueless to the incriminating evidence now safely hidden in my jacket. Back home, we spread the documents triumphantly on my kitchen table, staring in disbelief. Perkins whistled softly. "I can't believe she went this far." Pete grinned eagerly. "We got her, Alex. She's finished." I felt a victorious smile creeping onto my face, tempered by cautious doubt. Almost. But if Diana's proved anything, it's that she always has another trick. I glanced out the window toward Diana's fenced-off paradise, knowing the final battle for justice and suburban sanity was still ahead. And next time it would be all or nothing. Demolition Day had finally arrived, and it felt like half of Cloverfield Hills had come to watch Diana's illegal paradise crumble. I stood nervously on my lawn next to Pete, Mr. Perkins, and Sharon, clutching a coffee cup for moral support. Diana, meanwhile, was pacing dramatically beside the neon-pink golf cart she'd parked strategically across my driveway as a final act of defiance. "I've notified the media," she shouted toward us, waving her cell phone aggressively. "This injustice will be exposed." Pete leaned in with a grin, whispering loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "She means her Facebook Live. Her last video got 7 whole viewers." Mr. Perkins chuckled dryly. 2 were probably her fake accounts. Diana shot us a withering glare before climbing atop a deck chair beside the pool, raising her phone triumphantly. "Neighbors, today is a sad day for justice and community spirit." I exchanged amused glances with Sharon, who'd taken meticulous notes on Diana's HOA abuses and financial scams. "You ready for this?" I asked softly. "Been ready since day one," Sharon answered confidently, adjusting her perfectly pressed blazer. A deep rumbling noise silenced the crowd as the city demolition crew approached. Their machinery loomed dramatically, an excavator towering ominously behind Diana's pristine white fence. Diana's bravado wavered slightly as she glanced nervously at the approaching crew, but she quickly masked it with her trademark indignation. "You can't do this," she shrieked theatrically at the foreman. "You're destroying a beloved community landmark." The foreman, utterly unimpressed, looked down at her clipboard. "Ma'am, your landmark was illegally built and improperly powered from your neighbor's property. The city has authorized immediate removal." "Over my dead body," Diana shrieked, melodramatically flinging herself onto a deck chair and clutching its armrests as if they were lifeboats. Pete sighed dreamily. "Isn't suburban drama beautiful?" Sharon rolled her eyes. "Just wait until she chains herself to the diving board." Right on cue, Diana sprang up, eyes bright with sudden inspiration. "That's exactly what I'll do," she announced triumphantly, grabbing a nearby chain she'd obviously prepared for precisely this scenario. "Oh dear Lord," Mr. Perkins groaned quietly, rubbing his forehead. Within moments, Diana was theatrically chained to the diving board, attempting an awkward selfie while still yelling defiant slogans. "Community first. HO forever." The crew paused uncertainly, clearly confused by the bizarre spectacle. The foreman turned helplessly toward me, eyebrows raised. "Sir, she's technically on your property now. Do you want to press charges for trespassing?" I hesitated, momentarily tempted by the vision of Diana being escorted away in handcuffs, but Pete nudged me, whispering, "Let's try diplomacy before jail." I sighed, nodding reluctantly. "Give me a minute." Approaching Diana cautiously, I offered a disarming smile. "Diana, listen. Think about this. Your social media audience is growing. Do you really want them seeing you dragged away like this? Maybe dignity is the better choice. She glared fiercely, but I saw hesitation flicker behind her oversized sunglasses. Dignity? You stole my pool. Technically, you stole my electricity and land, I pointed out gently. But let's say we settle this amicably. She lifted her chin defiantly. How? Step down from the diving board, end this gracefully, and I promise the city won't press charges. Plus, Pete might edit you a nice highlight reel of your protest for Instagram. Pete waved cheerfully from behind, phone already filming. I'll add dramatic music and everything. Diana narrowed her eyes suspiciously. You swear? I promise, I reassured her sincerely, extending my hand. With a dramatic sigh, she nodded, unlocked her chains and gracefully climbed down, straightening her clothes with a proud flourish. She immediately resumed her composed pose, addressing her phone solemnly. Neighbors, for the greater good, I'm stepping aside for now. The moment she stepped off my property line, the excavator roared to life. Within seconds, its heavy claw descended dramatically, demolishing Diana's beloved poolside deck. A collective cheer erupted from the neighbors. Diana's carefully masked expression slipped briefly into genuine heartbreak before she retreated quietly, disappearing into her house without another word. 2 weeks later, Cloverfield Hills felt like a different community. Where Diana's illegal pool had once sparkled, now stood our whimsical new neighborhood garden, complete with neon pink flamingos, cheeky signs declaring HOA free zone, and Pete's prized collection of garden gnomes arranged like a victorious miniature army. At the grand opening barbecue, neighbors chatted enthusiastically, laughter replacing whispers. Mr. Perkins proudly handed out homemade cookies labeled Diana Free Treats. Even Sharon allowed herself a rare smile as she sipped lemonade beside a smiling Pete, who was recounting his heroics in slightly exaggerated detail. Alex, called a familiar, softer voice from behind. I turned, startled to see Diana standing awkwardly near the fence line, looking strangely vulnerable without her authoritative clipboard or HOA hat. Diana, I greeted cautiously. I didn't think you'd come. She hesitated, glancing nervously around. Look, I wanted to apologize. I might have let the power go to my head. Might have. I teased gently, earning a reluctant smile. Fine, I was out of control, she conceded. I never meant things to get so out of hand. Cloverfield Hills meant everything to me. You can still be part of it, Diana, I offered sincerely. Just not the dictator part. She smiled genuinely for the first time. You know, gardening was always my real passion. Then grab a shovel, Pete called enthusiastically from behind me, waving her over with exaggerated welcome. You owe Alex at least 50 tomatoes. Laughing lightly, Diana joined us, awkwardly picking up a garden rake, clearly unsure how to hold it properly. Sharon chuckled beside me, whispering conspiratorially, Bet you never thought you'd see this. Honestly, never in a million years, I admitted, watching as Diana cautiously attempted gardening for the first time, her expensive shoes sinking into fresh dirt. As the sun set gently over Cloverfield Hills, illuminating our new community garden in warm gold, I finally felt the peace I'd dreamed of when I moved in. Maybe the suburban utopia I'd imagined wasn't perfect. It was better. A little chaotic, occasionally ridiculous, but undeniably ours. Pete, noticing my sentimental smile, clapped a friendly hand on my shoulder. Welcome home, Alex. By the way, did you see your latest electricity bill? I groaned dramatically. Don't tell me. Relax, he laughed warmly. For once, it's completely normal. And somehow in that moment normal felt extraordinary enough.